eyes up, don't get all tied up. Hoping you wise up the multiple lies of the multifaceted, multi-complex system of living that people are living. Stuck in inertia, that's a diversion. Government worship, instead we are searching ancient mysteries, ancient history, sacred energy, and how to discern it. Human autonomy, truth of philosophy, UFOlogy, human psychopathy, super anomalies, human ecology, you got lobotomies up in your consciousness. All the thoughts that we've been dancing around. The system wants to blow your candle out, but we won't let it. We reject it with our pathetic lies, so we chant it down.
Chant It Down podcast is your gateway to your unraveling of a complex system that is grabbing hold of the lives of you and everyone you know. Come untangle from this woven web to understand this crazy world. Chant It Down with your host, Loomis.
Welcome back to Chant It Down. I'm your host, Loomis. This is Chant It Down. ChantItDownRadio.com is the website. Today's episode is 261, and this is actually the Tell Lie Vision Visions Part 17. And in this mini-series I started back in 2015, we've talked about many things involving how entertainment invaded our homes and our minds, and how the inception of television and movies were brought to us to control and manipulate and mold our minds by culture creators and worldview shapers. When you turn a screen on and watch their material, you sip a little bit of poison each time. And today we're going to focus on the intelligence aspect of the world, the CIA, the MI6, Interpol, and many others who are actually, if you didn't realize, are involved in our movie making, in our culture creation, in our media manipulation, and largely behind the writing and rewriting of our news stories, and definitely behind making of false flag events with fake events down to crisis actors. And we've explained that in great detail on this show over the years. The other aspect of intelligence that most people picture is behind the scenes is like coups of leadership in foreign countries, the espionage, etc. But who are these people they select for the jobs, whether it's regime changes, smuggling narcotics, or participating in mass shootings and false flag events? Who are these mysterious people? They are people who have been through major mind control and abandoned their own identity through abuse tactics similar to satanic ritual abuse, and are the worst regarding all order followers doing the bidding for their masters. That has to be, without a doubt, the most obvious treasons against humanity. I thought the best thing to do in this category is to do a deep analysis of the Jason Bourne films, which I've always felt were actually feeding real insight into how some of this actually works. So I invited on an expert in film analysis that looks for the appropriate clues, nods, and meanings and winks in this film world that is none other than the Psyop Cinema crew. Today, just half of the crew, Thomas Millary. Him and his co-host Brett explore film from the politics perspective, demonstrating how the artistry of cinema combines with psychological and technological knowledge to engineer culture in subtle and sometimes not so subtle ways, making each of us the subject of the greatest mind control experiment in history. And I agree thoroughly, and I enjoy their thorough work. So welcome to Chant It Down, Thomas.
Hey, thank you so much for having me on. This is going to be a great discussion. Obviously, you can't get more relevant to Psyop Cinema themes than the Bourne franchise.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I always thought that these movies were released to give us an idea of what they are really doing to us, and as their little, karma game where they have to tell us what they're doing before they do it, kind of thing. So I felt like, it's time that these get exposed, even if they're old. I would assume that most of the audience that is tuning into this show are going to be people that have seen them, but let's just say you haven't, then maybe touch on them and then watch, or then listen to this show, because then it will make a lot more sense. So anyway, I guess let's start. Maybe we should just unravel a bit of the background and production to this. Where do you think we should go right now, Thomas?
Well, first, let me give my summarized analysis of what I think is going on with this franchise. That I think a lot of what's happening here is a limited hangout about CIA sponsored mind control, and it's produced by a group of celebrities, people involved in filmmaking, who I think are all part of a very long running tradition of how spooks like CIA agents love to sponsor media about the CIA, and not just film. That goes back to a lot of novels and kind of the espionage paperback industry going back into the Cold War. It's a very, very proud tradition for spies to sponsor media about spies. And I think that within the Bourne franchise, a lot of what's happening here is depiction of mind control that is, I think, largely fetishizing and glamorizing mind control, particularly what we can call Delta programming, which is like super soldier, combat, espionage, assassination programming. And I can say a little bit more in a moment about Delta programming as a subset of what we would talk about as monarch mind control. Yeah, to fetishize that kind of Delta programming for film audiences. And it does, you do in these movies contain, you see a lot more open portrayals of CIA villainy than I think you would get in filmmaking nowadays, just because
Yeah.
the political climate is very, very different. Where basically from 2015 onward, you get this cultural coding of conspiracy theory, of anti-CIA, anti-deep state stuff, as it's undesirable. It's associated with right-wing cranks and all of this. It becomes heavily, heavily stigmatized by mainstream media, by mainstream entertainment. That's not necessarily the case at all in the 2000s when this is being made, when Hollywood celebrities felt a lot more free to go after the deep state military industrial complex and all that kind of stuff, because that stuff was coded as being associated with the Bush administration, which a lot of these people in Hollywood, they really hated, obviously. So there's a lot of globalist infighting going on here, a lot of inside
Yeah.
baseball that we're probably not privy to. But it is interesting how the Bourne movies do tell the truth about some of these aspects of these really evil operations from American intelligence, partly, as you were alluding to in your introduction, because of a revelation of the method. And, they reveal these things in large part to establish a feedback loop between fiction and reality in the minds of the viewers. That's all part of programming audiences on a mass scale. The revelation of the method is part of the method, as something that Brett and I have talked about on Psyop Cinema quite a bit. But then I do think that some of what's going on here is honest political critique back when there was some semblance of anti-imperialism in Hollywood. Maybe the last gasp of that was during the Bush administration. That kind of goes away entirely when Obama gets into the White House. So a few different things going on here, but mostly I think that what's happening here is a very is at best a limited hangout concerning the realities of trauma-based mind control. So I wanted to say that up front, and I'll circle back to some of those points as we get more into the films. But I think maybe we could say something now about about Delta programming, about kind of the history of super soldier-based mind control efforts. If you want to say anything there, or I can go more into that.
Yeah. Well, you made a point that I have thought about before about I kind of put it into 2016, but maybe 2015 is a good time too, where the political climate changed a lot and everything. Well, when Trump got in, everything conspiracy was painted with a broad brush and raked over to this pile of bad, where before there was a different, and movies have changed, and if you just look at the movies in general and the propaganda in them since 2016 and the wokeism and all of it really has changed a lot. And movies really started sucking too, just on a viewer basis. Like, yeah, I mean, I look at movies different like you do too, as mostly programming pieces, but just as a good entertainment. I mean, if we were going to say movies dropped off some point, I would say 2016 to now they've really gone to shit. But um
Yeah, I think
yeah.
that kind of when you have the Great Awakening in the early 2010s, like around like 2014, you see a major sea change in Hollywood where it's the toxicity just becomes so much more blatant, not just because of the social messaging, but because of just all the psyops kind of really rise to the surface. And then in 2020, for obvious reasons, you kind of things get even worse. So, people are going to watch movies, which is fine. Like, don't watch movies in the last 4 years. Probably don't watch them in the last 10 years. Like,
Yeah.
really, you want to go even much older, and even then, you still have to be careful. But yeah, I think about 10 years ago, just the quality of our propaganda, the poison starts to taste a lot
Yeah.
worse about like 10 years ago.
Yeah, and I have noticed one thing about observing uh propaganda in general is that it's easier to spot as time lapses on, especially like you can really see it and it really looks bad in hindsight. Like you go, wow, that's really terrible. But it's gonna look, I mean, these times right now are gonna look really bad later if we, you know, can even have any good movies that come out that make these ones look even worse. But yeah, the programming in general, whatever. I mean, you look at COVID programming, what they tried to coax to get everybody vaccinated. Now it looks even way worse than it did when it came out. So yeah, I've noticed that a lot. But let's change gears a little bit, and what you're going to say about Delta programming. I think that's a great place to start here before we kind of get into the films themselves.
Yeah. So that's kind of how I think about these movies. That's what I was really looking for, was that portrayal here. So Jason Bourne, thinking about him as a mind-controlled super soldier who's been traumatized heavily to the end of becoming this exceptionally skilled assassin type. And less here, it's less about deception and more just about the combat and assassination aspects of those kind of skills and how they're developed in these programs. And so I mentioned the subset of monarch mind control called Delta programming. And so you just to review there, we're talking then about the most shadowy, sinister, advanced, and mysterious successor program to CIA's MK Ultra. And it's interesting how, with even the discourse around these mind control programs, that MK Ultra itself has become one of the conspiracies that even the most normie of media outlets will use as their example of real conspiracies. Like, it's
Right.
maybe even encouraged for normies to like think about like, oh yeah, that's one of the real ones. We're allowed to believe in that. We're supposed to believe that. But then this is often in these rhetorical ploys, in these fact checking articles about conspiracy theories, like, oh yeah, obviously this, and this. But if you question the official narrative of any of these other things, you're insane, falling for what right wing propaganda, all of those kind of things. And it's interesting because even though MK Ultra itself is in like the shallow end of that pool in terms of acceptable stuff, analysis of these successor programs, these much more advanced forms of trauma-based mind control, those are among the most heavily stigmatized within the mainstream in terms of conspiracy theories, the existence of something like Project Monarch. But to get into some of the details of what talking about there, basically thinking about advanced mind control based on the creation of alters, of alternative personalities that are created and programmed by splitting the mind via the application of really extreme and horrific trauma, and different alters being created to perform different functions and correspond to different types of programming. To quickly run down the list just for review, I'm sure many of your listeners know, but alpha programming, general baseline for mind slaves, beta programming having to do with sexuality, so seduction, prostitution, pornography, gamma programming being about advanced deception techniques, and by some accounts involving explicit layers of demonic activity, theta programming being about the development of psychical abilities, omega suicide programming, and then the relevant one to Bourne is delta programming, which has to do with alters that are capable of advanced combat, assassination techniques, espionage techniques. And so I want to make a distinction here, so that Hollywood is very generally, as you well know, obsessed with the theme of mind control, and it shows up in so many movies, these themes, the symbolism. And part of the broad thesis of my show that I do with Brett, Psyop Cinema, is that the techniques from these mind control programs get laundered into the entertainment industry over time. And so what used to be high intensity individual trauma-based mind control becomes kind of spread out through the whole public in a more low intensity fashion to manipulate not individuals but whole populations. And so we can think of like MK Cinema or whatever you want to call it as just these broader depictions of mind control. And the Bourne movies fit into that category. They're not what Brett and I would refer to as monarch movies per se, which are this very specific subset of films that have this really intricate, layered vocabulary, symbolic vocabulary that fetishizes the mind of the victim.
Right.
And that's often where you see all this common symbolism of the stuff related to the journey to another world, Alice in Wonderland, Wizard of Oz, where you get the butterflies, the ballerinas, music boxes, red shoes, shattered glass, mirrors, hourglasses, bird cages, all that kind of stuff. And so we get actually a couple hints of that darker, more esoteric realm in the Bourne movies, particularly with the drowning imagery. We can come back to that when we get into
Yeah.
some of the plot details. I really do think that it's really one of the dirty secrets of the modern world, just how prevalent this trauma-based mind control is and how influential it is on pop culture. and society. And so that's why I think about someone like Jason Bourne as an action hero in terms of Delta programming, but also, I mean, it's really worth saying that the creation of super soldiers as a goal for intelligence and military that exists in far less esoteric context than something like Project Monarch, to bring us back to the realm of acknowledged by the mainstream for whatever that's worth. You can find plenty of documentation of DARPA's decades-long efforts to create advanced super soldiers.
Right.
People like General Paul Gorman, openly talking about the creation of exoskeletons and outlandish-sounding things to create more advanced soldiers in service of the military. So, and basically rewiring memories, rewiring beliefs to create those kind of super soldiers. So that is not fanciful, not speculative, a very, very real thing. And I think we have to look at the Bourne movies in the context of that well-established history.
Yeah, I think that's great. That's a great background to run through before we begin, because again, there are many different types of movies, as you mentioned, different types of programming, and to identify it right up from the beginning is really good. I think that's awesome. Um, so what I got into a little bit, and I'll share this, and then we can kind of just go all over here. But the original material was written by uh, Robert Ludlum, and uh, his novels were written and greatly changed to fit the movies, apparently. But this guy was a U.S. Marine and an actor, and so he wrote these novels. And then um, I also wanted to say too, I always say this on the show, and when we get into this kind of thing, I feel like Hollywood, high up military, CIA, and Satanism all bleed together at certain levels. There's a certain level where all this kind of flows together. And so we're looking at the tactics here of somewhat satanic uh, ritual mind control. Like there's a form of it here in this kind of training. So whether the novel writer had anything to do with that, I couldn't really find anything. Did you find anything more about Robert Ludlum?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I did see in a couple essays from his nephew Kenneth Kearns, I believe, that he said about Ludlum that the Cold War provided a fruitful backdrop, and Robert's insights into the world of spies and international intrigue won acclaim from serving agents. Indeed, three of his college roommates went on to become intelligence officers. Several of his best friends worked for MI6 and the CIA, and his wife Mary had ties to the Pentagon.
Oh
Some
wow.
suspected that Robert himself might have been a spy. So that's just from some tabloidy article from the guy's nephew, but still, I mean, you can see the connections right there. And it's interesting too how this guy ends up basically turning out just like a couple dozen espionage paperbacks starting in his 40s after being a Marine and being involved in theater and some other things early in life. And then he starts writing these novels in this, I think in the 70s, and from 1980 to 90, does these few Bourne novels that form the backdrop, even though they were heavily changed, like you mentioned, for the movies we're covering. And then there's a ton of sequels to the Bourne series written by other authors. But all that stuff combined with those remarks from the guy's nephew also wrote some interesting things about Ludlum died in a house fire under apparently mysterious circumstances. There's some speculation that his wife might have killed him. It sounds like his nephew was a little bit undecided about what he thought was going on, but it sounded like that there's some pretty weird stuff there. But whenever I look at these kind of even like lowbrow espionage fiction, I mean, it just goes right back to the Cold War where, I mean, Alan Dulles like loved James Bond. And like by the 70s, you just have this revolving door of spies and people who are writing about spies and CIA vetting so many of these things that multiple CIA directors have talked about. They think that spy literature is a great way for the public to learn about this kind of stuff. So ton of red flags back there. So I also going to talk about a ton of red flags around the filmmakers, but even going back to the novelist, this whole thing glows so brightly.
Oh wow. Yeah, see, I didn't know that nephew aspect. I didn't catch that one. That's cool. That says a lot already right there. That he was involved, like he had some knowledge. Like people don't, just like you and I could go through a roommate experience and nobody is going to be in the CIA, it's it's just really like, to have that happen randomly is pretty weird. So that that shows he's got some deep involvement for sure.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, especially when it's multiple people, it's not like he just randomly ran into like a guy in the street to work for the CIA, but when you have these multiple contacts in CIA and
Yeah.
MI6, ends up into this career. Yeah, certainly be very naive to see that as coincidental, particularly again with the well-established history of the CIA kind of like laundering their preferred portrayals of themselves through even trashy fiction. And yeah, that continues on in terms of weird connections to some of the people behind the movies. If you want to start going through some of those
Yeah.
names.
Yeah. Let's do that. Doug Lehman directed the first film, The Bourne Identity. I just know that he directed a few other films, Swingers, Go, which was like a wannabe Pulp Fiction and rave drug scene pushing movie. But I don't know if you have more dirt on this guy or not.
Well, yeah, I mean, his it's interesting. His father was Arthur Lyman, who served as the chief counsel for the Senate's investigation into the Iran-Contra affair. So that's pretty deep involvement in U.S. politics. Pretty major scandal right from the get-go there. And in fact, apparently some of the reworking of the novelist material into what Lyman and then the screenwriter Tony Gilroy, who is really involved with the franchise, ends up directing one of the later movies that we won't be talking about today, but ends up at least writing the first three as well. The way that Lyman and Gilroy kind of reworked the material to fit their preferred political messaging has to do, which is again, some of it's ostensibly in a very shallow sense anti-CIA, but we can get into some of the ops of what's going on there, some of the limited hangout things, and some of what might be genuine, but some of it is coming from this experience that Sky Lyman has of his father having been such a public figure, investigating and publicly speaking about this major scandal involving U.S. military and intelligence, and apparently to the point of saying that the Conklin, the villain in the first movie, was partly modeled off after his father's description of Oliver North. So
Oh,
some pretty deep inside baseball stuff going on there. But yeah, it's interesting that this was just Lyman's first blockbuster action movie. He had done a few, like you mentioned, he had done a few comedies in the 90s, but just with his father being this kind of connected guy, I think it's pretty interesting because when you look at the rest of Lyman's career, so like Mr. and Mrs. Smith, Brad Pitt, Angelina Jolie, another spy movie that doesn't even really have the pretense of some of this like critique of American intelligence, just the straight up normal Hollywood glamorizing of this kind of material. Sci-fi movies, Jumper, Edge of Tomorrow, Chaos Walking, that have a lot of the kind of typically suspect themes and sci-fi themes you get from honestly most sci-fi. American Made. I haven't seen this one. This Tom Cruise movie. I should watch it.
okay.
About Barry Seal, the pilot who flies missions for the CIA and does all this drug smuggling stuff. I have not seen it. From what I've heard, that is like classic limited hangout territory where it shows some of these more seedy actions from the CIA, but really stops short of showing the full extent of all the stuff that the CIA is involved in terms of in terms of all these operations. And the CIA did provide at least some production assistance to these movies, to the Bourne movies, in terms of just at least establishing shots of Langley. So they're at least cooperating in that way, and so then the fact that Lyman goes on to continue to make movies about spies. I saw one quote from an actress who was working on a TV show that Lyman was producing, and at the same time, Lyman was in the middle of making this movie Fair Game about the Valerie Plame scandal, and she says that she knew that Lyman had contacts down at Langley, so she asked him if he could get her an introduction so she could go there and kind of take some notes on basically how to better portray CIA stuff. So it's apparently pretty well established that like Langley like has Lyman's phone number.
Oh yeah, yeah. I was thinking about that when I was watching it. Like, oh, who gives permission for a flyover of the CIA headquarters? Like continual every movie we see like like an air shot of that. Like you can't just go and get that without permission. I'm sure that's a no fly zone. Yeah.
Oh yeah, definitely. No, that's very intentional. And so basically, it seems like there's some kind of working relationship Going on there, and then about Tony Gilroy. If you're right with moving on to him, since he's a pretty
Yeah,
major figure
yeah.
as well. Yes, so that he writes most of the Bourne Identity. I think that there was another. It was a rewrite. There was another script that ends up being mostly scrapped, and this guy Gilroy comes on there, and I think he glows pretty hard as well because his family members are kind of all involved in filmmaking. And this isn't the reason that he glows, this is just some background. But his father, Frank Gilroy, was also a writer and director and producer of both film and theater. Tony's brother, Dan Gilroy, is a screenwriter who ended up directing movies like Nightcrawler and Velvet Buzzsaw. Tony Gilroy's other brother, John Gilroy, has edited a few of Tony's movies, like Michael Clayton, Duplicity, Bourne Legacy, this later one without Matt Damon in the franchise. And John Gilroy also edited the Extreme Monarch trauma-based mind control superhero movie Suicide Squad. But as far as Tony himself, like I said, kind of with Mr. and Mrs. Smith from Doug Liman, with Gilroy, he just kind of does stuff that romanticizes and shows very neutered portrayals of the intelligence world, with stuff like this movie Duplicity or this movie Beirut, the latter of which got a glowing review in a CIA journal about popular culture, by the way. And Gilroy also, as a screenwriter, did significant rewrites on The Devil's Advocate,
Oh, I
the
remember that.
um
Yeah.
the
Uh-huh.
yeah, the supernatural horror drama with Keanu Reeves, and which has a lot of insinuations within it about elite Satanism and its connections, not just to this major law firm that's portrayed in the movie, but as you get hints of in that movie Devil's Advocate, to international operations, banking, money laundering, arms brokering. The legal defense of child abusers, interestingly enough, is a big thing in that movie, Devil's Advocate. So Gilroy writes that movie. So again, like I think a lot of suspicious material going on there. But yeah, Gilroy ends up being the main writer for all three of these movies before directing one of the other later sequels. So yeah, so just between and this is before even getting into Matt Damon, between Gilroy and Lyman, you can kind of see where this material is coming from.
Yeah, yeah. I didn't know so much about him, but that makes some sense. And um, oh, is my mic working? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So before we get into Matt Damon, let's get into the second director who directed the Bourne Supremacy and Bourne Ultimatum, Paul Greengrass. He's a British
Yeah.
director. And one thing that stuck out to me is he directed Flight 93, which is basically a brainwash piece to uphold the official narrative of 9/11. And he co-authored the infamous book Spycatcher, it's in 1987, with Peter Wright, former assistant director of MI5, and it continued enough sensitive information that British government made an unsuccessful attempt to ban it. In the mid 80s, the book was banned because of revealing insights into how the British Secret Service works. So already there we have that tie. I mean, he's already got a background of looking at this stuff, but I'm sure you have more.
Yeah. So some of those same things jumped out at me. The fact that he directed United 93, like in between Supremacy and Ultimatum, he does this ultimate normie 9/11 story, let's roll movie.
Yeah.
And then he's kind of in the same mode of some of these other guys like Lyman, who this kind of like Bush era Hollywood lefty stuff, like even as late as 2010, so the tail end of when those kind of movies were still being made. He does The Green Zone, also starring Matt Damon, which is this anti-Iraq war movie. So this kind of like left edge of normie acceptable opinion about these matters about U.S. intelligence, the military, what's really going on. All these things seem to be this guy's MO as well. But yeah, the fact that he that was a journalist before he was a filmmaker, and that he co-writes a book with the guy who was like you said, I mean, the former assistant director of MI5, and Peter Wright, in fact, was an associate of James Angleton, who's one of the most infamous spies in history. I mean, like it doesn't get more spooked up than that. And interesting, I think it's in that movie The Good Shepherd. Matt Damon actually plays Angleton, so this stuff all just kind of like just like all folds into itself constantly. So yeah, I think that kind of says it all in terms of the fact that, like I said, no one's on this franchise who doesn't glow to some degree, and it's before he even starts making movies that Greengrass is involved with a guy like Wright.
Yeah, you're right. And then we get into Matt Damon too. And I don't really know a whole lot about him, but he's a Harvard graduate, and not that that's like a bad thing, but I feel like they do choose a lot of these people out of like Yale and Harvard and stuff. But I think you probably know more than me. I've never really, I'll be honest, I've never liked Matt Damon in really anything. Just personally, he rubs me the wrong way. But in these movies, because maybe he doesn't talk as much, I don't mind him as much. But still, I just never liked that guy. But he always portrays a military guy, or CIA, or I didn't see that one you talked about. Was it Green something rather? But
Green
what you
Zone, yeah.
Green Zone? Yeah. What else do you have on him?
Yeah, so with Damon, it's fascinating how he, like you said, he's a Harvard grad, but one of his the main parts of his public image is that he's like just like this Boston everyman. Like that's a really, really big part of how he likes to portray himself. But I think that there's a lot of weird stuff going on with him as well. I mean, first off, starting with his very well-known association with this other Boston CIA bro, Ben Affleck, who directed
Right.
Argo, of course, which is like the paradigmatic CIA propaganda movie, which was heavily CIA supported. And, you know, it's around that movie Argo that Damon's friend Affleck talked about. He wants to make Langley proud, did his joking, not joking comment about Hollywood being full of CIA agents, which is just obviously true.
Right.
Affleck also plays a CIA agent in The Sum of All Fears, that 2002 movie, which was also had production support from the Department of Defense and the CIA. Affleck's ex-wife Jennifer Garner filmed a recruitment video for the CIA in 2004,
Oh wow.
and yeah, you should look it up. It's crazy. And her show Alias, she plays a CIA agent, and the CIA spokesperson had glowing things, pun intended, to say about that show and its depiction of the CIA. So that's Affleck, super super spooked up, and he and Damon, they come into fame together. They have other movies in the '90s, but their breakout roles are in Good Will Hunting, which they write, and that very popular movie in '97 goes a long way to instantiating this kind of Boston everyman image that Damon has, despite the fact that he is a Harvard grad and he ends up having some of these other connections. I mean, I think Good Will Hunting is a terrible, terrible movie, and there's this very funny Louis C.K. bit about the movie, how it's just insane once you realize that Matt Damon wrote this role for himself, where it's like, yeah, you know, I'm working class and I drink beer and I get in fights all the time. And I tell my friends that's just who I am. But I'm also a genius. And all the nerds who go to school, they're so mad because I know even more than the. And it's so funny. It's just insane just how narcissistic of a movie it is. And there's also a scene in Good Will Hunting where the NSA tries to recruit Matt Damon. And then he responds, his character responds in the movie with kind of a again these kind of leftist talking points that were very critical of basically the military corporations, all this environmental messaging and stuff like that. And it's a very self-indulgent monologue, just like the whole movie is very self-indulgent. But again, some of the stuff he's saying is perfectly true. But it's just funny with that messaging because Affleck and then Matt Damon, the exact day that Good Will Hunting gets its wide theatrical release, they're at Camp David with Bill Clinton, with globalist extraordinaire, murderer Epstein buddy Bill Clinton, and I think Harvey Weinstein's in the picture as well. You have this picture of Harvey Weinstein, President Bill Clinton, Matt Damon, and Ben Affleck, like all together at Camp David, because apparently Bill Clinton was just so interested in this movie. And this was before Good Will Hunting becomes like this breakout hit, or before these guys were anything approaching major celebrities. So it doesn't make any sense that they're there with those guys. But I just think that that kind of duality of the movie having like, yeah, like I'm this everyman blue collar leftist, but then he's hanging out with Bill Clinton to screen the movie for its opening. It just really goes to show what's going on with kind of like a lot of these guys who seem to be anti-establishment. And I do think they actually have these political convictions to some degree, but there's just so much about Damon's career, especially with all these CIA and military related roles, that is just so hollow and so synthetic, I think.
I agree. Yeah. And I think that's why Damon and Affleck both rub me the wrong way because of Good Will Hunting, and I've never liked those actors ever. Yeah, but it is an interesting point, just to go back a little bit, about how the political climate has changed, and how distrusting the left was of military and all that with the Iraq war in 2003. And then these same people are the same people during COVID who are like, would never question the narrative, and the news would never lie to them. And that you'd be insane to question these things. Are you a right wing white supremacist? Like, that's how quick it's changed, just when we look at not that long ago, really. Like, I mean, yeah, it's getting to be a while ago, but really not that long ago. So we've seen the left like change really quick, and the right as well. And it's just gone into absolute insanity. And I wonder sometimes if some of these leftists would ever go back to that viewpoint and go, oh yeah, but I guess not. They're just too programmed.
Right, right. I mean, that's why there's some unfortunate things about that worldview that just leaves it very vulnerable to being psyoped. And because so much of this, there's so much globalism latent within that kind of anti-imperialist leftism that it's there. They dislike all this stuff because they code it as being related to right-wing American nationalism, and the American empire is then bad if it's related to right-wing politics, to social conservatism, to conservative Christianity in any ways. And of course, the American empire like is bad when it is related to these things. But these people basically would be totally fine with the dissolution of national sovereignty, with the instantiation of totalitarian globalism, if it's coded as left-wing, as progressive, all of these kind of things. That's why, even though they're totally right about some of these aspects of the evils that the CIA has done or whatever, there's so much emphasis from these Hollywood celebrities on like the oil companies, like that over and over again in these kind of like 2000s anti-Bush movies. It goes back to, well, the real corruption is coming from the oil company. And there's some truth to that, but it gets really, really inflated because they don't want to see just like how deep the globalist evil goes, how much of it impacts their own social values, how much of it impacts the sectors of culture that they are loyal and dedicated to. So, I mean, certainly, like again, I think some of this is sincere, but there's a reason basically that as soon as George Bush gets out of office, Barack Obama gets in there, the climate totally changes.
Yeah, it does. It's amazing. Well, let's move into the movies themselves. I just wanted to point out the timing. And if you have anything else to share about the background, go ahead. But I just wanted to point out the timing. This came out, the Bourne Identity came out right after 9/11, like maybe a year at the most. But with this big increase of security in the country everywhere, not just the country, the world, and cameras starting to be everywhere, and surveillance being this thing that's just up to such a high level. So I thought it was interesting, the timing of this movie right in that area.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. 2002 Identity comes out, and that's certainly one thing to zoom in on is the depiction of mass surveillance in the movie. We can think about what's going on there. Is it a limited hangout? Is it predictive? Is it sincere? But definitely, the timing is very important. There was actually some concerns from the studio that the
That's
movie
right.
might be a little bit less popular post 9/11, and then there was an ending that was filmed that was going to kind of soften the critique of the CIA, make it look a little bit less bad, but apparently it just didn't really fit at all. So they ended up not including that in the theatrical release. So yeah, I guess I could just do like just brief plot summary in the movie, and then we can kind of like zoom in on some
Sure,
important
sure.
points.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's see. So, okay, yeah. So, spoilers for everything. And again, a lot of what interests me about this franchise has to do with kind of this context that we've been talking about. That because the movies themselves, they're very repetitive. They're not terrible, but they do seem very dated in some ways. Not the least of which is the fact that they all end with Moby, the same Moby song. Definitely
Oh,
makes it
right.
feel,
Yeah.
yeah, the extreme ways. I think is the ending credits for all three of these movies, but. And a lot of it is just the mind control mystery, stringing together a lot of chase scenes, some of which I think are very dull, some of which are honestly pretty cool. But anyway, so Bourne Identity 2002. So an amnesiac Jason Bourne is trying to piece together what's happened to him after he's been wounded by gunshots, then nursed back to health after being fished out of the Mediterranean, and he's following these clues, and then he finds himself on the run throughout Europe with this a woman named Marie who helps him and then becomes his lover while the CIA is trying to kill him. And he's discovering all these incredible combat abilities that he has. And toward the end of the movie, this very important scene is this confrontation. And I'm skipping over a lot because, again, some of the details are extraneous. So I'd be interested to hear whatever you pick out as important. But toward the end, we get this confrontation with Conklin, the CIA guy, who's heading this program Treadstone that had made Bourne into this super assassin. And it's revealed toward the end that Jason's conscience had perked up when he had been assigned to kill this exiled African leader who had been agitating against the CIA and talking about their operations in the African continent. But when it came time to pull the trigger, Jason for once couldn't do it because the politicians' children were all around him. After his hesitation, he gets shot, from which followed his amnesia and everything else. But basically, end of the movie is Jason gets away and joins Marie in the secretive and pleasant location to start a new life until the next movie, and Conklin gets killed under the orders of a higher-ranking CIA officer, a deputy director, I think, who ends up becoming the villain for the next movie. So that's kind of so broad, and there's a ton of shaky cam and punching and chases all in between that. So I've got a few scenes I want to pick out as particularly important to the themes that we're discussing. But I'm curious, what stands out to you?
Well, a couple things, like in the very beginning, they find a laser pointer embedded in his hip when he was found unconscious in the water, and they fished him out. And it does make me wonder what these kind of agents would have embedded in their skin, like, like, and what it is it ends up being this laser pointer that has the Bank of Switzerland account number for him to go. And it's interesting, the Bank of Switzerland, I kind of feel like that would be a stable place probably to have an account for the CIA agents. But I thought that it just stuck out to me that, yeah, the embedded under the skin kind of thing also was kind of being portrayed a lot too, even in the alternative media back then. Oh, the RFID chip is coming. And because I was looking at stuff way back then too, like that, like, oh wow. But it's interesting to think that, do these people have, like, are they chipped, or are they okay with having these things implanted in their skin?
Yeah, that reminds me. So that's interesting that first, like, those first like 5 minutes, including the chip in the skin thing, that I think was all that remained in the movie. I mentioned that Gilroy wrote most of it, and I think that the only part of it that was retained from a script from this guy, William Blake Herron, who had been brought in to make the movie more action oriented, was those first 5 minutes. And like, I think Gilroy even had like some kind of dismissive comment of like, I didn't write those first 5 minutes. Like, why was there something embedded in Jason Bourne's ass? That's weird. Or something dismissive along those lines. But just wanted to mention in terms of sus production credits. So this might be a coincidence because, again, Herron ends up not really contributing too much to the final product. But before we go further into the movie, I just have to say that it's really weird how few ideas are floating around the film and television industry, because one of Herron's previous writing credits was for The Lazarus Man, which is this very short-lived Western in 1996 television series about an amnesiac soldier after the American Civil War who's searching for his true identity, with his own secret eventually having to do with like treason in the US military and all this stuff. And then a couple decades later, Herron does another short-lived series, Agent X on TNT. This one he actually creates. He's not just a writer for, about a super secret agent who secretly reports to the vice president alone to handle the cases that are beyond the capabilities of the FBI, CIA, etc. So again, this guy barely even touches the final script of the movie, but even for a guy who writes that one key scene, it's just the same secret agents, amnesia, treason, all this kind of stuff throughout his whole career. So thought that was notable as well.
Yeah, that is interesting. Yeah. Yeah. And maybe yeah, further along there. So Jason Bourne goes to this bank, and he has a handprint scan, which now doesn't shock anybody. But if you think about back then, that was kind of a new thing. Like, and I think they were showing us this coming tech that's coming to us as for the commoner. Like, they already had it, but they were kind of like showing. I think that was actually throughout this whole franchise, they're showing us things that they actually have and they actually do. And that might be just one of them, that handprint scan. Because back then that was like, whoa, that's pretty futuristic. But now it's like, oh yeah, well, people do that all the time.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, one of the things that really sticks out to me here is a scene when so Marie is this woman who is at first innocently helping Jason because he pays her to for a ride to Paris, and she doesn't know any of what's going on. But then after there's an attempt on their lives from the CIA, both Jason and Marie are horrified to see this documentation that shows that basically the CIA has been instantaneously able to uncover every bit of info on her life, and it's done very
Yeah.
well, basically just like showing that that they can find everything so quickly. And again, with some of the other dynamics that we've talked about, I think this is a mixture of a couple things. I think again, some of the people involved in the franchise, probably even Gilroy and Lyman to a certain extent, are like trying to critique overreach of intelligence, but also the revelation of the method about the surveillance state has been a thing in Hollywood for the at this point for a while. I mean, even it's something like that Will Smith movie, Enemy of the State, in the '90s, which has major 9/11 predictive programming. A
Right.
lot of what's going, which and that movie is also, is also supported by the U.S. government. Is revelation of the method basically to disorient people in terms of showing these realities about surveillance.
Yes, yes, they are doing that constantly, with the technologies of the surveillance, and how too you have, like you were saying, when they look up basically what the girl is doing, they went back and like, show me where she's lived the last 5 years. Now back then that wouldn't be so easy, compared to now with Facebook and all this, well, let's call it life log, which the DARPA actually created anyway, before Facebook. But yeah, I mean the things that they can do. And then um how uh let's see, I had on my notes something about oh yeah, so the CIA has access to all cameras. They can find, you know, all these different street cameras. Of course they have an override on every camera, including nowadays your phone camera, I'm sure of it. So it's just like, it's just kind of showing you, you know, their reach that they can do. And another thing that did kind of sort of alert me was that there is compartmentalized institutions within agencies such as the CIA. There's this Treadstone project. I was thinking Treadstone, what does that mean exactly? I guess it could mean stepping stone, like tread as in stepping and stone. I don't know, but did you get anything on that at all, or Treadstone?
No, no, not really sure what they're going for there. I don't know if there's some symbolic significance I'm not quite getting, or if it just like sounded like a cool spy name.
Right, right. Yeah, I didn't either, but I was just wondering. Yeah, but it's interesting, and I'm sure the CIA has, like, and these agencies, they have normal people working for them that think they're doing a good job, and then there are compartments where there's more secretive groups. But you know, just like any institution, but at the same time, they carefully handpick people to join an agency like this, where, you know, the very best of order followers are. And I doubt if presented with dark information these people would ever even be able to speak out, or would ever do it, because they know that they would be breaking their code, and their, you know, that they handpick people like that. So to have a leak out of the CIA is pretty unlikely, unless it's a controlled leak.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And this would be something to talk about more with Supremacy and Ultimatum in a
Yeah.
moment. But the kind of CIA characters they present is fascinating because here you see some kind of conflict between these two characters, Conklin and Abbott, who are both involved with Treadstone. And Conklin's the main villain in this one. It's worth talking about some of his dialogue with Jason at the end of the movie,
Yeah.
but he ends up being killed by Abbott basically because Conklin is too much of a loose cannon. He's a liability. So you see in there some interagency friction just based on tactics. Then again, this is more about supremacy, but you have Conklin characterized as a nut. You know, he's just kind of a lunatic doing crazy things. Abbott ends up being kind of a traitor or a criminal. And then with Ultimatum, it takes it further, where the Ultimatum does more firmly establish like a good CIA agent, a character that's established in supremacy than the other ones, but it really kind of takes it like all the way to the top. So
Yeah.
so yeah, this these different kinds of personas that we see here in terms of CIA agents is fascinating and important as well. One thing I want to mention in terms of a very early scene in Identity has to do with some well-known dialogue where Jason is describing his abilities. This is
Oh
one of his
yeah,
first scenes with Marie, and
yeah.
this I think is very important because this really goes to what I was talking about in terms of the fetishization of Delta programming. So the lines in particular that I'm thinking of is when he says, I can tell you the license plate numbers of all 6 cars outside. I can tell you that our waitress is left-handed and the guy sitting up at the counter weighs 215 pounds and knows how to handle himself. I know the best place to look for a gun is the cab or the gray truck outside. And at this altitude, I can run flat out for a half mile before my hands start shaking. Now, why would I know that? How can I know that and not know who I am? So this is really important because this really showing that depiction is glamorization. So even if it wasn't just an all outside, which it mostly is, it'd be very hard for them to show mind control like in this kind of action movie context without glamorizing it in a damaging way because people aren't supposed to hear that dialogue and then another hour and a half afterwards of Jason Bourne doing awesome action hero things and come away horrified by the realities of trauma-based mind control. No, it's supposed to make Delta programming look awesome. And
Yeah.
what I think is really insidious there is how Jason's amnesia is supposed to contribute to that cool aspect of his combat skills. Because, like, whoa, this guy's just a blank slate. He doesn't even know who he is, but he can still do all this cool stuff. So, like I
Right.
said, some sincerity probably to this intended critique, but you can see why Hollywood would not, as an organ of propaganda, for the deep state wouldn't just be allowed but encouraged to make these kind of movies because whatever kind of anti-imperialist sentiment is genuine here, what's going to really stick in people's minds, in fact what did stick in people's minds, because the Bourne movies didn't inspire any kind of revolt against the illegal actions of the CIA, what stuck in people's minds is Matt Damon being a cool action star who can do cool things because
Right.
of essentially MK Ultra.
Right. And that he's this like super soldier and he's so good he can take down all these people and he's this is how he thinks when he goes into a restaurant. He can figure out, all this detail and then like he's this awesome action star. And yeah, they're putting out that someone like that is cool. And actually it probably in the end would probably make some kids watching this want to join the CIA, even though of all the bad stuff. Like when I was a kid, and probably you too, they sold us on GI Joe, the action figures and stuff, and I was like, oh wow, that's cool. Like Army must be cool. Like I was thinking as a little kid, same kind of propaganda.
Definitely, definitely. And I think that some of the really darker aspects of the movie come out in the end scene when Bourne is confronting Conklin. You see really some of the chilling mind control dynamics come out there. And it's more subtle than this actually. I mean, again, these movies are, like I said, repetitive. So there's basically a more detailed version of the scene with the MK Ultra doctor at the end of Ultimatum.
Yeah,
But still, just the way that the villain of the first movie, even though Jason is obviously physically superior, could kill him, is obviously in control, like as an action hero, is just so confidently yelling at Bourne, you're a malfunctioning weapon.
yeah,
You fail. Like he basically starts dressing Bourne down for having failed his previous mission, despite everything else that's happening. He just immediately asserts his control as a handler, as a programmer, rather, over Bourne. And the way that the scene is edited with all the bright flashes and stuff like that, you really see these mind control dynamics coming to the fore. And so just by yelling at Jason, reminding him, you're a weapon, I send you to disappear, you're nobody, asserting his lack of identity, that is the programmer reinstantiating the same trauma that broke down Jason's identity in the first place. And of course, you get basically a positive outcome for the hero. He doesn't kill Conklin or anything like that. He just leaves. He,
yeah.
basically asserts that he's trying to leave everything. But with that kind of flashes and editing, like that is all part of the method. That's all part of low intensity MK Ultra being depicted in real time as part of these movies.
Yeah, definitely. And I was going to go back and just brush on a detail here too. That these assets, these people that they can like basically they can access assets who are normal people in appearance with normal jobs, and they all have multiple passports and currencies everywhere. I feel like that might be a real reveal right there of what these people might kind of be they've got people everywhere, and I've seen that being communicated in multiple movies, which makes me think there might be a bit of truth to that little bit aspect. What did you get anything out of that?
Yeah. I think that, yeah, I think that that's right. I think that just showing, yeah, it's just showing exactly what you're talking about in terms of these different kind of people, how they get involved with agency operations, with the seamlessness of these people weaving in and out in society is definitely part of the same normalization of intelligence culture.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and one thing that you just talked about a bit ago too was how his commander Conklin says these agents. He says in one line, he says these agents are like behavioral software. He's basically saying that they are just programmed to do what they do, and just basically like a machine. And he gets these headaches too, Jason Bourne. And then when Jason kills this agent at the farmhouse a little later in the story, he has a talk with him, and the guy asks Jason if he gets these headaches. And headaches can be, I would say maybe a form of being under that kind of a, a mode of mind control, possibly.
Yeah, definitely. And the idea of this kind of like software model of the human mind is so important because so much of the MK Ultra theory of how these people program humans goes back to cybernetic theory. There's a lot of connections in the history of cybernetics that lead into programs like MK Ultra with the idea of the human mind as a programmable computer. And that's part of why Revelation of the Method is so important, why they depict these things, because again, it comes down to the idea that humans are controllable through feedback loops, which is why it's not a mistake. It's very intentional that they depict in movies the same things that they're doing in real life. So I think that that's important to note. And yeah, the headache thing is pretty chilling. These like hints of like the deep physicality of the trauma that these people have gone through.
Right. Yeah. This is like one of the side effects of this deep trauma. And then when Jason confronts Conklin and asks him who he says he is, and he says, "You're government property, you're a malfunctioning $30 million weapon." And like you were saying, he says, "I send you to be invisible, you don't exist," and things like that. And I think people are like this who are complete government property. It they're trying to tell us how it works, I think. And I wonder sometimes too, like people that do some of these really nefarious things that in our world, like chemtrail pilots, are they government property? Did they undergo things like what you see here in the film?
Yeah. I mean, that's another thing to keep in mind with these movies is that it really, I mean, the Delta programming I think is very, very real, as I've already talked about, but it's also it can be misleading to stick in people's minds that it's like this high level action hero stuff that involves this kind of deep programming. Whereas, like I said, I think all of us would be horrified if we realize just how far this kind of advanced trauma based mind control goes.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, if there is even chemtrail pilots, so I've often thought that maybe they're all automated, but just and as an example of people that carry out some of the worst things, like who would like, for example, who would spray their own population below, probably more likely they get international people to do it, but just that's it. Like these assets, these people, they're possibly people that they have are basically just government property, and they pass to one agency to the other. It's just quite possible it works that way.
Yeah, definitely. And those are all my notes on identity. If you want to move on to
Yeah,
supremacy.
let's move on to the next. Yeah, that's all my notes too. Yep.
Okay. Yeah. So again, quick plot summary of this one, and yeah, we can dive into individual scenes the same way. So villain in this one is Ward Abbott, the CIA section chief who had Conklin killed at the end of the first one. And so again, spoilers for all of these, but we find out partway through the movie that Abbott is the one who's behind all the bad stuff. In this one, that he conspired with a Russian oligarch to steal $20 million of CIA funds. And then a Russian politician who was going to cover or was going to reveal the perpetrators died, with a cover story that it was a murder-suicide by his wife. Now in the present day, the CIA, we get introduced to a sympathetic character, the deputy director, Pamela Landy. She's on the cusp of obtaining documents that's going to reveal all this. When a deal goes wrong and the agents are killed who are involved, and it's Jason Bourne who is framed for this. So Jason is now in India with his lover Marie from the first movie, but then a Russian FSB agent named Kirill, played by Carl Urban, actually shows up and kills Marie in his attempt to kill Bourne. So Bourne gets back into action. More chases, punches, lots, even more shaky cam. Paul Greengrass likes shaky cam even a lot more than Doug Liman does.
Yeah.
And then eventually, Bourne exposes Abbott's crimes. Abbott kills himself in front of Landy. Bourne gets his revenge, killing Kirill in Russia. And then there's these two very important dramatic beats at the end of the movie. One being Bourne has now realized that as his first mission, he was the one who murdered this whistleblower Russian politician and the wife who ended up being framed for it. So he goes to their now adult daughter and gives her a solemn apology, telling her that what really happened to her parents. And then in a phone call with Landy, I do like, this is in the next movie, Ultimatum. I like how this ending scene is recontextualized. That's clever. But in an ending phone call with a good CIA agent, she tells him, kind of as a consolation prize, his real name and birthday and hometown. Moby plays once again. Jason does the thing, revealing that he's somewhere people don't expect him to be during a phone call. That some of these movies repeat too. But yeah, that's the plot of this one. What stands out to you this time around?
Well, yeah, and that's good you brought that up, because I'd seen these movies before, but I didn't realize that very end scene was actually taking place in the next film until I rewatched him recently. You're talking about where he's spying on Pam Landy from across the building in New York City. I was like, oh, okay. I didn't realize that they had recontextualized that scene. That's funny.
Yeah, that was done well, I thought, with the next one, when you find out, well, we'll talk about this with the next movie, but
Yeah.
that she's giving him a secret code. It's not his real birthday, it's an address. Just because, yeah, I mean, it's nothing to write home about, but it's a fine ending scene to Supremacy, which I think is probably the most forgettable of the three of them. But yeah, seamlessly
Yeah.
recontextualizing it is done pretty well. So yeah, I have some thoughts on some of the opening stuff where his love interest gets killed, but where do you want to start?
Well, yeah, I think the theme repeats itself here too, where you have these real life agents like this that don't belong to a single entity, but they're like hired for whoever, contracted out to whoever agency needs them. In this case, the Russian who hires the asset to kill Bourne. That this kind of thing sort of has repeated itself from the last film. Again, that these people are like, these assets are kind of like ghosts, where they don't have necessarily, they have a bunch of passports, they don't have a particular place of living or country of existence, they just kind of go all over, and that's repeated in other movies too. So I feel like when they're trying to repeat this message, there might be a bit of truth to that one, but that's I already made that point, but I got that again. And just a little bit, and I'll go back to you. When Jason Bourne's passport is entered into the system, it then pings a CIA substation in London, and while he's trying to enter Italy, and then it pops up on a screen, and then an agent standing by forwards it to the main CIA office. I think that's exactly how it works with these kind of things. It just bounces all around till it goes to the appropriate department, and that's that's another, like, I think, a reveal on how their system works.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's just like the passport thing, the seamlessness of it all. It's that it's not any one person, one contact point. It's the flow of information is
Yeah.
what makes these intelligence agencies so nefarious.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, I want to pick up on this scene pretty early on in the film. So it's when Marie and Jason are being pursued by the Russian assassin, and this I think is what's important thematically here, is that Jason, while they're getting away, is that they're in this car getting away, this car chase scene, and he's basically signaling to her that he's going to get out of the car, take out the assassin, and probably like take the fight back to Treadstone, because he warns them at the end of the first movie, "Don't come after me," or I'll, like he'll take the fight to their doorstep or whatever he says. And this all harkens to the film's tagline in the marketing, which is "They should have left him alone." And then his love interest is trying to dissuade him from this. Bourne says to her, "We don't have a choice," and she says, "Yes, you do." And then she's
Yes.
almost immediately shot and killed right after that happens. So By the assassin is trying to kill Bourne, but he immediately kills her by mistake. So right after she says that, so it's an instantaneous vindication of Bourne's instinct that in fact he does have to fight back and take it all the way to the top and do all these things. So I guess the couple things there are like, one, I'm not saying that I think the movie should have had more hand wringing about, oh, he's wrong to fight back or anything like that. That would be pretty lame too. It's just that this framing really furthers the, like I said, the fetishization of Jason's abilities, because the idea that the mind control victim can use his programming to fight back because Bourne is given such a clear-cut moral and practical reason to do the things that that he's doing. It does. It's not like he even has a choice. So therefore, it's just kind of like his revenge quest using his assassination and espionage skills are almost just like a force of nature that are completely justified in the audience's eyes because of that framing in the early scene. And maybe even more interestingly, this is an example of something you see in a lot of movies where it's the death of a woman symbolizing the death of a soul. And you see that a lot in Christopher Nolan movies. He's a director who kind of goes back to that over and over again. But it's in a lot of action movies in general,
James
and in
Bond.
this case,
Yeah.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's one too. But of Bourne being alienated from his humanity, from the idea of a normal life, being pushed back into this realm of violent espionage, because of having his love interest killed in front of him. So yeah, the death of a woman is the death of his humanity that plunges him into this realm of superhuman combat. I think is very notable as well.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, yeah. I see that as I see that in a lot of movies. They do that. It's a good way to like get the audience to also just simply want revenge, you know. Yeah, exactly. But it has a deeper meaning behind it for sure. For sure. Um I don't know if you had more on a little one scene that popped out on me is when the blonde girl from the first movie, Nikki Parsons, I don't know if that's anything to do with Jack Parsons, but it just came kind of popped in my head. But anyway, she's being interrogated by other CIA agents about Treadstone, Pam Landy, and a few other people. And she says one of her jobs was to monitor the health of the agents. And she says their mental health, because of what they'd been through, and they were prone to a variety of problems: depression, anger, compulsive behaviors, headaches, and sensitivity to light. And I would say that that was kind of like put it, I mean, these people would have to be pretty shut off from all that, but you are human, so some of this is gonna surface again, especially for the actions they're taking. But I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, definitely. It's similar to the headache thing that you pointed out with the previous movie,
Yeah.
just showing the effects, the damage that this has on people. I mean, again, these movies are mostly, I think, somewhat shallow action depictions of the realities of trauma-based mind control, like I've said, but it's with hints like those that you can kind of see, kind of see the real horror of what's going on here. But like in terms of like the shallow portrayal of some of these topics, I was thinking about. I think it's Abbott, or it's one of the similar evil CIA characters who says partway through the movie about Bourne, come on, guys, we ran this guy's life with total control for all those years. We should be a step ahead of him. And that's in the context, obviously, of Bourne being several steps ahead of them at all times. He's outwitting them. He's doing all this cool stuff. And so there with the context of the hyper-competent Bourne basically getting one up on the CIA guys who are pursuing him, I mean, it really is downplaying the reality of what this stuff looks like, because it's so easy for a mind controlled victim in this depiction to turn it around on the perpetrators, as if somebody who has been under this total control could simply use the results of that control just to fight back. And if he's like cool enough, a great enough action hero, he'll pretty easily beat the bad guys. So again, these are not Monarch movies per se. This is more general MK cinema.
Yeah.
But something you get with those Monarch movies very often is a final act where there's some kind of liberation for the mind slave. That in reality, what's going on is just a deeper dissociation. It's a power trip for the powerless. It's just the ultimate enslavement in the guise of some kind of liberating defeat of the enemies. And that's not exactly what's going on here, but you can see a psychological function here with the idea that like a Delta program mind slave being so easily able to get one over on his captors and programmers.
Yes, yes. And then Abbott, the I guess the main bad guy in here, he says about Jason, his mind is was broken. We broke it. And it's just like satanic ritual abuse. And again, I believe the CIA is part of, Satanism at some level anyway. This is it, they broke his mind. He was broken. That's basically what he's saying. And uh another scene, Nikki Parsons says they don't make mistakes. They don't do random when they think that Jason actually made a mistake. And those are traits of a mind controlled agent, someone who's been through training to cut off the individuality and total and a total order follower. Someone is basically just like a robot.
Yeah, 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 I agree. I think that's what's going on there. Those are all my notes on Supremacy. Do you have anything else in that one before Ultimatum?
No, it's funny. I don't either. That was
Okay,
probably
good,
my
good, good.
least. That was my least favorite of the three, actually. Too. I thought it was kind of like it's okay. It was kind of dull compared to the other two. The
Yeah, I agree. These movies kind of go back and forth between being somewhat compelling, like it's hard not to smile at some like yeah, how well some of the action beats are done, but then when the chases and stuff like that gets old, they get really, really old and plus just the kind of like really washed out look for like a lot of the filming style. That's part of the kind of 2000s action stuff that I don't miss and is not very compelling about these ones, but Ultimatum, I think, is more interesting. It circles back to some of the same themes and underlines them in some ways that are maybe more sinister, but more helpful for our analytical purposes. And I think some of the intimations of some of the commonalities with satanic and with ritual abuse and occult initiation come out more in this one. But again, just a quick plot summary. So Bourne is now trying to figure out who's behind Treadstone and its successor program, Blackbriar. And there's a Guardian journalist who's in touch with someone in the CIA who's about to blow the whistle. Jason gets in touch with the journalist but can't stop him from being killed. The CIA takes the new villain this time around is Noah Vossen, who's another CIA deputy director, and he's in charge of the Treadstone successor program Blackbriar. So some assistance from this character Nikki, the Julia Stiles character that you've been talking about, who worked
Yeah.
for the CIA in the previous movie. She's helping Bourne. In this one, there's some hint that they might have had a previous relationship. Jason also tracks down the CIA whistleblower, but that guy also gets killed. But Bourne is able to find enough evidence to discover that the CIA is running Blackbriar out of New York. Jason goes there, and then there's that contextualization that we talked about, where we find out that Landy is giving Bourne coded information under the guise of telling him what his real birthday is, and he goes to this hospital following that address, where he meets this creepy MK Ultra psychologist called Albert Hirsch, who gives Jason a very similar spiel that Conklin did at the end of All of Identity, but this time with a lot of more sinister added details that Jason volunteered for this program out of a misplaced sense of patriotism, saving American lives, and all that. Then after sufficient disorientation being broken down, Jason was fully inducted into the program after agreeing on Hirsch's orders to kill this unnamed, helpless, unarmed prisoner. Um, and again, the movies do the same kind of stuff repeatedly. So he spares Hirsch in the exact same way. He spared Conklin and spared Abbott in the other movies. And then the dramatic beats here at the end are Bourne is about to be killed by another assassin from Blackbriar when Bourne repeats dialogue from the first movie that a dying Treadstone assassin said to him about look at us, look what they make you give.
Yeah.
Main villain Vossen shows up, shoots Bourne, he falls in the water, so it's a full circle thing from the first movie. And I want to say more about that submersion and water imagery. But then there's a hopeful ending with a good CIA agent, Pamela, who's against all this corruption and what the CIA has become and the corruption of American values and all that, testifying publicly about Blackbriar, and Vossen and Hirsch get arrested. And interestingly, this is all to the way to the top thing. You have Scott Glenn here as the CIA director, and it's intimated that even he's being implicated in all of this. And then Bourne, of course, survives. Last shot of this trilogy is him not drowning, but swimming away in the water. So I have a lot to say about that ending. But yeah, what stands out to you about Ultimatum?
All right. Well, let's see. Yeah, it all comes back to there's a lot of flashbacks for the movie of um his name was Hirsch, right? The
Mhm.
brainwashing trainer. And he says, will you commit to this program? You hear it again and again. Will you commit to this program? And you hear it a lot through the movie. And I thought, I think of that like, is like you giving permission. They always ask for your permission anyway with a lot of this stuff we do in society. And it's just one of those things. He didn't have to, but he did. And so he gave up his free will to this agency, and that stood out to me.
Right, right. Yeah, the idea of complicity that that elite cultural programmers really it's very, very important for them to whether genuinely or not, to at least create the impression in their program victims, whether individual, high intensity, or mass scale, low intensity, that you're signing on to all of this. It's like, hey, you signed up for Treadstone. Hey, you bought the ticket to go see Born Ultimatum in the theater. Like, what do you want? You signed up for our program. It's all part of the same thing. It's all
Right.
it's initiatory logic.
Yes, it is. It is. And at the beginning too, the journalist Simon Ross, getting CIA secrets and trying to publish it. I doubt that ever really happens unless it's allowed. The CIA owns the media, so I find that is like one of those really like propaganda little slips in there, as if the London Guardian would publish anything that they wanted to about the CIA. I don't think it works that way.
No, no, certainly, yeah, you're totally right. I mean, The Guardian, I mean, it's obviously influenced by British intel, like that's pretty well established.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, it just a little bit of propaganda there. And then the journalist Simon Ross says Project Black Briar on his cell phone. And again, we see this repeated theme through all three films where it's a key word, it pings the system, and notice how they pick it up and it gets sent from substation to substation and until it gets to the right people at the CIA. And I bet that really does exist. Let's just say on the phone you decided to say, I don't know, bomb or something, then that goes to all these different things, or mention of any alphabet soup agency or whatever, chemtrails, or any sort of thing. It probably pings up, AI catches it, and then if someone wants to further investigate it, they will. I think that's really how it does work. I got that from all three films really, but it illustrated it probably best in this film.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like a lot of these other elements, it's most underlined in the Bourne Ultimatum, things that were maybe only hinted at in the first couple. It's fascinating though how all this surveillance stuff is very real and it's very sinister, and like maybe there's an inkling of something positive here in terms of like making people aware of these realities, but it's also I thought with this movie, one of the weaker aspects of it, either intentionally psyopy or just maybe a little bit lame in terms of its critique, has to do with this. So Blackbriar is a successor program to Treadstone. It's one of the ways that the trilogy it tries to build momentum, but instead just ends up recycling beats. And so like the Treadstone's the big thing in the first movie, so it has to be something even bigger and scarier. So it's Blackbriar in these other ones. But it's not at all like the kind of the intensification of the horror that you get like from something from like MK Ultra into the more advanced techniques of Monarch, or it's not a peek behind the curtain into the realities of CIA's overlap with Satanism, the occult, child abuse, any of these things. It's just basically like we had Treadstone and now we have Super Treadstone. They're both just kind of generic black ops programs.
Yeah.
I mean, there's like I mean, there's a line in there that it started out as a surveillance program, and then now it's involves renditions and assassinations and other kind of things, but it's all the same kind of stuff that the franchise has been talking about from the beginning. So we're still in the shallow end of the pool in terms of what we're allowed to think of in the mainstream in terms of what the CIA and related agencies get up to.
I agree. Yeah, totally. Because I know that they're just giving you little like hints and stuff. But most from what I've just in general like researched about CIA, most of what they do is really more so control of information and control of media and stuff, rather than some actual agent on the scene out there. I mean, I'm sure that I know they have that, but I think that's like 90% of their actions are actually, behind media work and what, movies and stuff like that.
Yeah, definitely. I
Fully.
mean, these people are largely narcissists, right? So they're just as evil and probably in a lot of cases much more evil than they're portrayed as. They sign off on these portrayals as in the media, but they're way less cool. Like none of these people are Jason Bourne. Like actually,
No.
like yeah, responsible for all the death and mayhem, but they're they're not action stars.
No, no, no. So what else did you get from this film? I mean, I got one thing that just kind of at the beginning there where Jason buys a prepaid phone. And I bet you they do want to get rid of those in society, to be honest, because they want to, we have control freaks behind our, our governments. So they would probably want every phone to be assigned by a person. I don't even, can you even buy those anymore? I don't even know. But it was an interesting note I took note of, is the prepaid phone.
Oh yeah, that's a good catch. That's a good catch in the context of all these surveillance themes. In terms of the political messaging, it's even more heavy-handed than the other ones. I mean, like, which again is not a bad thing. Just the fact that these movies are at least willing to like make some kind of a robust statement, however half-hearted it might be in some ways about what was going on in terms of these international illegal actions from intelligence agencies. But you really see like the American flags on the desks of the evil CIA guys while they're having evil CIA phone conversations. Like it's really, really like I remember like I have a vague memory of like in 2007, like on Fox News, Bill O'Reilly is getting furious about this movie because it's anti-American and stuff like that. So, so again, you have the left-wing propaganda successfully ticking off the right-wing prop here, but like a lot more dialogue about saving American lives. So this is again very very Bush era. Talking about these justifications about we need to do torture, we need to do the assassinations, we need to do renditions because otherwise the terrorists will win. They hate us for our freedom. And again, like this all goes out the window for these left wing globalists as soon as you have someone else in the White House, some other regime, like ideological regime, driving the propagandistic car. But as far as it goes, like these critiques are valid, and it's like there's something to be said for the way that the movie calls out some of the evil that was going on in terms of the war on terror era intelligence actions. But more interestingly, I think has to do with the kind of some of the more explicit hints about the initiatory logic of these things, like the fact that Jason Bourne essentially has to perform a human sacrifice to get
Yes.
inducted. Like he has to kill someone on command. It's very ritualistic how that happens. And just like in occult context, this murderous action is the breaking down of his own old humanity. He has basically transgressed this moral limit so that he can attain power, not as an occultist, but as a spy in this case. Though there's a lot of commonalities between the archetype of the spy and of the occultist. I mean, there's a reason that Aleister Crowley, walked in both of those worlds so seamlessly, and so many
Yes.
other people since him. So that, and then the fact that even though the death of Marie was in the previous movie, you have a lot of flashbacks here to after that car chase in Supremacy when she's shot and she's driving. They go into the water. So again, the whole trilogy starts with Jason Bourne in the water. Supremacy, he basically has to let go of his dead lover as she's after they've crashed into the water, and they go back to that scene multiple times here. So again, that's underlining the death of the soul stuff. But then also, like I said, he gets shot and ends up in the water. But instead of being passed out and helpless like at the beginning, he swims away this time. So it's kind of that power trip for the powerless here because of our Delta mind control slave. He's in this. He gets submerged. He's drowning again, and drowning has major occult significance. It comes up in a lot of mind control movies. This
Yeah.
kind of floating imagery, weightlessness, is about this total control that programmers have over their victims, or even just the occult significance of water as an element, basically the liquidation of foundations, of things that are solid, of solid aspects of humanity. There's this kind of metaphysical significance to the element of water that you see in the occult, and that basically gets transferred into these mind control movies quite a bit. And so you have the water imagery in all three, but here it's really, really underlined. And so the fact that our action hero survives the drowning, he swims, he gets away, basically shows that I think it's hints of a greater dissociation that's taking place individually for the character of Jason Bourne and probably for the audience as well.
Yeah, yeah, you do see a lot of water scenes where you have this person with the hood over their head, the black hood over the head, being pushed into the water, later being the person that Jason shoots. Um, and there was this note I had about again, Nikki Parsons. He's sitting down with her, and she says they had to break down the agents before they were operational. So yeah, they're breaking down the humanity within them. They had to break them down. They had to push them to that point in that altar in their mind to where they're no longer the person they were, and that initiation was the shooting of for Jason was the shooting of that unknown character in the black hood that was tortured.
Yeah,
And
yeah, definitely. The initiation, the drowning stuff, like the fact that, and again, just the way it's edited, you see hints of of the method of these
yeah,
visual techniques that are meant to disorient the viewer and just kind of giving you a hint of what actually happens to on a high intensity individual scale to these mind control slaves.
yes, exactly. And yeah, you did hint in the last one, and I did pick this up too, how him and that Nikki character may have had a relationship. And she says, it was difficult for me with you. You don't remember anything. And as if they were in a relationship. And I noticed she kept looking at him all the time, like hoping that she would remember or he would remember her. But it's like he was stripped of those emotions. So it's almost like the movie showing that he doesn't really have, although he did get involved with that other girl, Marie, but it's like he was stripped of those emotions, and he, in the process of his transformation into Jason Bourne, that he just doesn't even remember and he can't go there. It's kind of an interesting thing I noticed this time watching it around.
Yeah, it's a great point. It's the alienation from the feminine. Just like his other love interest is taking from him here. He's so broken down. His amnesia, his programming is so strong that he doesn't really even have, like, it's obvious that there's some kind of this hint of a previous romantic relationship, but he can't go there. And even though he survives, there's no there's no idea here of him returning to a normal life or anything like that, which is somewhat different than I mentioned Christopher Nolan earlier. So I guess briefly I'll say spoilers for The Dark Knight Rises, but there's something positive, even though there's a lot of very sappy things in those movies, is the idea there that Bruce Wayne Batman returns to his humanity. He gives up the superhumanity and the dissociation with that, and then gets a normal life basically by embracing this love interest character from that movie. And there's kind of like the idea of the return to like something like a normal family life is the regaining of humanity that can be lost during these dissociative techniques. And there's no hint of that here. Jason Bourne is a blank slate who's fully alienated from the feminine and from normal family life and the possibility thereof.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah, I saw that. And then when we get into let's see, I just have a few more notes, I think, but well, at the end there, we have Pamela Landy, and she's sided with Bourne, and she says, "This is not. It's not what I signed up for. This isn't us." And I think that's just more propaganda bullshit. You know, like, oh, that isn't the CIA. They're not really that bad. Some of them are good. It's like, I don't know. It's just the whole way they put that in there is like they're showing some of the bad things they do, but then they're covering it up with a little bit of like, this isn't us. That's what I got from that.
Yeah, totally. I think she's the real self-insert character for the perspective. I mean, I know Doug Lyman's only the first movie, but for the kind of perspective from someone like him, like Greengrass, like Matt Damon, these people who are like obviously spooked up, but they still want to have this kind of humanitarian message in there. The idea of someone like her, this character who is like wants to appeal to American values, which again, if this movie was made nowadays, you wouldn't have any of this stuff about about basically reclaiming some kind of positive American identity that's being corrupted. That's also a little bit dated as well in terms of the political messaging, not necessarily in a bad way, but the idea of someone like her who's going to speak out publicly, blow the whistle,
Yeah.
and expose the bad CIA people, and presumably she'll become the good CIA person in charge. I think basically they're totally fine with showing as much CIA evil as possible. They kind of write a blank check for themselves with that, as long as they have a character like her in there, because that can justify for them, well, I can, like I can be on the phone with Langley getting directions, production notes for my movie and stuff like that, because surely like I'm the equivalent of like a Landy and not like a Hirsch or Conklin or one of these guys.
Yeah. They always have to show you that they're still the heroes, but sometimes they do bad things, but ultimately they're still the heroes, and we should believe in them. And you see that in there, and of course you said that about uh um, the good American propaganda. You see the what was his name, Hirsch, saying or yeah, he said you're going to save American lives, and and then at the end, Jason Bourne's like, "You said you would do whatever it takes to save American lives," and oh no, actually no, it was Hirsch that said that. You said what it take, you would do whatever it takes to save American lives, and then I think what it is just they had to slip that in, just like with the saving the CIA, from totally looking bad. It's like they put it in there, and it's part of his propaganda too. So
Yeah. I think probably what Greengrass is getting at there, like it is part of his like mid 2000s like anti-Bush critique, the idea that the saving American lives stuff like would have been the justification from right-wing propaganda at the time for so much of the global war on terror, stuff like that. And so he's trying to basically make his villains sound like his political opponents, again, who are guilty of very, very bad things.
yeah,
But like at the same time as the idea of like, well, you have the CIA doing all this terrible stuff in the name of saving American lives, like we were just talking about. You have this character who represents all of the surely the good that the CIA could do with a positive American identity and a reformist attitude and all this
right.
kind of stuff. Even though, like we've covered, these movies are barely scratching the surface of the kind of insane levels of sinister malevolence that these intelligence agencies are implicated in, like the super soldier assassinations. That's step one. It goes a lot further.
Oh yeah, definitely. Well, did you have more that you wanted to get into with the ending of it?
That was about it for my notes.
Okay, yeah. I know one thing that stuck out too is he said, Jason Bourne said, recalling in his flashback, "I'll be whoever you want me to be, sir." And I think that just shows that a lot of these people that do go into these programs like this, pretty much they do give up their identity. And then of course the Hearst says, "You're no longer David Webb. From now on you'll be known as Jason Bourne. Welcome to the program," after he does the initiation. And so that's just kind of like, and you see this a lot in it, you see a lot of these double identities a lot in pop music and Hollywood. Like Beyonce has another identity or two, and all these I can't think like right now. I always usually have a few more examples, but there's always like rappers with multiple names they have and characters that they have. It's like that's all the same part of this sort of double identity, and that identity that they were given through satanic ritual abuse.
Yeah. That's the Monarch stuff, right?
Yeah.
Totally. It's alters. It's the trauma of psychic splitting for sure. Like that's where a lot of that stuff comes from, and that's why like it's just so explicit at this point. So many pop and rock music videos are just nothing but Monarch tropes over and over and over again. I mean, my goodness, look at some of the recent Taylor Swift stuff. It's pretty crazy how much is there. But oh yeah, and I guess to go for the very lowest hanging fruit, like Jason Bourne is like intimations of that reborn, rebirth, new identity
Yeah.
is worth stating as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And where this kind of individual though, like just to kind of my summation or summing up of this is just that um this is I think these movies were put out there to for one thing to show us what they're doing to us with surveillance, as well as telling us that these kind of Manchurian candidate super soldier types are those who they use in possibly some of these false flag shootings that we get. A good example is the San Bernardino shootings that happened. I don't know how long ago, and they blamed it on Muslim extremists, but civilians reported seeing men in black fatigue and black SUVs. So that was the leak before the official narrative. So they do use these kind of in real life, some of these characters that they Jason Bourne like people in you know, that's where they use them a lot of times, is I think either in these events that they do, or you know, behind the scenes stuff that we don't see. But I believe that's part of it, is that's where these people come into play. And sure enough, once we had 9/11, look how many false flag shootings we had, and you know, different events that people like you and I and many people in this community have sifted through and obviously seen that it's a bullshit psyop. And yeah, so I think, and then later on too, I also look at the little, as this is a little expose of how intelligence runs. And this kind of connects to a little bit of how they even did that a little further with Edward Snowden when he came out. And I see him as a control leak. Basically, they're to say to us that, yeah, we're spying on you through the use of this technology if you care. And so again, that's one of the defining themes I've seen throughout all these films, and is, yeah, we're doing this to you, but yeah, I guess you don't care because we're going to do it anyway.
Yeah, I totally agree. So much of it is revelation of the method, and so much of it is that is what I said at the outset. It's the fetishization of Delta programming. It's these people are not at all afraid to show all these dirty little secrets from the CIA because for one thing they have so much more. That so there's limited hangout stuff going on here as well. And for another thing, they know what's going to stick in people's mind is the glamorous action hero portrayal of this kind of combat programming aspect of mind control programs like MK Ultra and successor programs like Monarch, and so basically you have probably just maybe naive and well-meaning in some cases, maybe overtly malevolent people in some others, but all these people, these filmmakers, these actors who are spooked up, but like have some of these earnest, probably left-wing humanitarian beliefs, and those basically and those beliefs get channeled and packaged into this kind of revelation of the method, limited hangout, fetishization, portrayal of trauma-based mind control. So it is kind of quaint to look back now and just kind of remember like the good old days when you could call out so explicitly the evil of intelligence agencies in these kind of movies, when you would at least have an effort towards, from the Hollywood left of U.S. military industrial complex of the CIA, etc. You don't have that anymore, but you can also see why that never led to any kind of real positive political change, and why so many of the people involved with those efforts, even if there was something honest about it, a glimmer of honesty there, that before any of these movies started, these people were already basically plugged into these programs, and why those political programs failed, to avoid getting absorbed into the broader globalist program that picked up kind of after that 2000s era ended.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, this is, you'll never no longer see a movie like this, I don't think. And um funny enough, you know, like, you know how people want to get into Hollywood, they, you know, the reason why you people have such a hard time getting into Hollywood is because it's controlled by these kind of people. And like every director and actor has these backgrounds that are not like you and I, and that's why people can't, commoner people get into these positions in Hollywood, because they're not, it's about, it's yeah, it's about who you're related to, but it's also about who your family background is. You know, they're always like high military families, not just Hollywood, pop music, any you know, thing big in these, in the music industry, entertainment industry in general, they're all connected to these agencies, they're connected to high up military, and that's why most people can never get past a certain point. They, you know, they could be an A-list actor and they still can't get into many roles unless they sell their soul some way. There's that line that we don't know where it is. We don't know exactly where, how to get to it, but there's a certain point where people either cross that line or they just can't get to that line because they are not part of these families, these backgrounds.
Yeah, yeah, it goes right back to Matt Damon, our star of these movies. Like I said, writing Good Will Hunting about like how he's an everyman who comes from nowhere and gets himself just because he's a natural genius, right?
Yeah.
And then even with that movie, there's this weird synthetic thing where he, for no reason, is like is watching that movie on its opening day with Bill Clinton, and then portraying a blank slate CIA amnesiac like a few years later in the Bourne movies. So Matt Damon kind of is what he's portraying here as this kind of this false version of this idea that this idea that he's this totally organic figure coming out of nowhere when like obviously there's some very constructed aspects to his career, just like of these movies in general.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that's a pretty good look at all these three films, and I think anybody listening should, rewatch them and then listen to this and see what you come up with. I appreciate you coming on, Thomas. And where can people find your work, and what is the next projects, some of the projects you might be getting into this year?
All right, let's see. So patreon.com/psyop cinema for bonus content, psyop-cinema.com, at cinema psyop on Twitter. And in terms of future content, we're just about to put out an episode on Taxi Driver that I think people are going to really find interesting. It's going to be the conclusion of a lot of research on what we call the Joker cycle that we've been doing over the last year and a half now, really. We're going to start a series on Oliver Stone this spring. He's going to be our next
Oh yeah.
director series. We're going to go film by film through a lot of his stuff. So that'll obviously be relevant and I hope interesting. And before then, we might cover some more recent films like Oppenheimer and some other things that came out in the past year that we haven't covered yet on the show, and some other movies that have been released from directors that we've covered, like Zack Snyder and David Fincher. And then otherwise, I'm also continuing the series on Terrence Malick that we're doing with our frequent collaborator Stephen DeLay. So a few more episodes on that. So a lot more psyop cinema stuff for people to look forward to if they're listening.
Yeah, cool. And that's on any podcast player too. Like people can find you anywhere that way.
Yep,
Uh,
Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all the usual.
okay, great. All right. Well, Thomas, thanks for coming on to Chan It Down. I appreciate it. And that's a great look at these movies that are now kind of irrelevant to what's going on, but at the same time, they're still relevant. So it's awesome to be able to talk about this kind of stuff.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. It's been a
Yeah.
great talk.
Thanks, Thomas.